So Jordan of Hotel Tech Report, I'm sure that you have lots of insights basically on all of these things. Can I just say, I don't think attribute-based selling is going to be part of 24. Like, I feel like that's basically squarely rooted in 1998 and some strategic white paper that, like, one of the CRSs kind of put out. What do you think?
With regards to attribute-based selling,
Yeah.
I think it's tricky for hotels. It's not the same thing as an airline, right? Where you go and you like you pay for the Ryanair of the world, and then you buy the extra like cabin space for your luggage. When you go to a hotel, you have certain expectations, and based on the chain scale, it's not like luxury properties. There's not that much that they can take away from you and still stay within that same price band.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I think attribute-based selling is for sure important, but like a lot of the attributes are already pre-configured based on the hotel that you're staying at. Like if you go to an Amman hotel, you're not going to like get $50 off your room to like leave your luggage at the front desk for your stay and not in the room. Like it's not quite the same one-to-one. But for sure, like selling packages and bundling different services on property and space utilization, like you always talk about, is absolutely here already.
I think that, like, that I'm really interested in. Like, it's more like experience-based selling, yeah, and actually kind of like and personalization-based, configuration of a guest journey. I think that's super super interesting, and I think that, like, that's one thing that we should be able to see, because I think that the kind of the flexibility with which people, or the kind of the unwillingness to pay a certain price, basically, even if you're kind of like putting those attributes basically on a booking engine. I just don't think that, like, people are willing to spend that much time on a booking engine. But I do think that actually, like, when you kind of then, once you're committed, basically, once you've got that foot in the door, then actually kind of, seeing how you want to configure your entire experience. I think that's super super interesting. One part of that is the features that you have in the room. The other part is basically the features of your stay, of the thing that you actually have committed to come for, and then looking at, how can the hotel actually be a real partner to you across that guest journey, across the 24 hours or the 72 hours that you're going to be spending. That, I think, is interesting, but I think that's very very different to the way that people have traditionally framed attribute-based selling. But anyway,
Yeah,
it is like an
and
interesting.
you see it to an extent with, like, when we booked our Berlin trip for ITB, it's like you could stay on the club level or whatever, and you get access to like F&B and amenities and a workspace for a period of time. So there's certainly that level of it, but I think for attribute-based selling to work, it has to be standardized, and the consumer has to know what they're getting. And hotels have too many different attributes that, like, it's not as easy as an airline where it's just like you get on your seat, you have your overhead luggage, you can check in at time A or time B. There's these standard attributes that you could pay more or less for, whereas hotels, it's very different from hotel to hotel. And then again, that booking experience has to be really seamless or you lose conversion rate. So if you throw too many options at someone, then you drop off conversion, and then you made an extra $50 on the booking, but you dropped your conversion by 50% and lost $10,000. And so it's a really fine line you have to walk.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I guess we've gone into it, but, like, great to see you again. I love all of our chats. Thank you so much for waking up early. I know it's pretty brutal, basically, whenever we ask you to work European hours. But no,
my
like,
baby's sick, so I didn't sleep. Don't worry about it.
crap. Okay, well, I'm sorry about that. So yeah, so let's go with that first question. What predictions did you make for 2023 that came true?
Yeah, so I think the big one was the kind of coming of age of the guest experience platform. So this, what I said last year was that historically it's been hard to scale guest experience applications because it's been like a point solution that solves one problem. And so that could be like an upselling solution that is incredible at driving total RevPAR and profitability, but it's very limited to that one use case. Then you look at guest messaging, and it's like you can improve the guest experience, but it's limited to that use case. So hotels need very specific use cases to adopt these solutions. And then the third one being contactless check-in, that obviously took off during COVID, where you're facilitating that check-in on the guest's own device and digital authorizations and taking payment, et cetera. And so what I said last year was, you finally had some companies And I think I did call out Canary in that,
Yeah.
that we're kind of coalescing these three together. And
Hmm.
when you put these three together, you now have the ability to drive profitability. You have the central with upselling, so you're having a direct P&L impact. You're having the central source of truth of the guest identity because you're taking their passport or their ID at check-in and their credit card. So you have their payment information that you could
Yeah.
then charge throughout the stay. And then you have guest messaging where you're interacting with them and interfacing them throughout the stay. So it's this holistic platform that's achieving almost every need that you have with a guest once they start their booking. And I think you have payment information, you have identity information. And so venture capitalists saw that starting to happen and pump money in.
Yeah.
And then the companies
Yeah.
were hitting the sweet spot. And so like Canary signed Wyndham, as I'm sure you know, and it's not just them, Dove and some of these other companies are doing an incredible job scaling. And so I think that it was like a banner year for guest experience. It was a space that investors were scared to touch before, and hoteliers were adopting like slowly and piecemeal. And that wave kind of started this year. And it kind of goes into one of my predictions I'll talk about later. But as interest rates rise, it's harder to do new hotel development and underwrite those deals. And so you still have guys and gals in suits sitting around an office trying to improve profitability and grow their businesses, and they no longer can add new properties to their portfolio at the same clip. So what do? They look at their existing portfolio and try to find optimizations. And I think that started to happen last year, and it's going to happen more and more this year. And I think that was another kind of catalyst for the guest experience platform kind of growth. So that was one that did come true.
Yeah. No. And I remember us talking about it, and you very much kind of called out Canary, and I love the guys. They're a fellow Stay Ventures company, so I think that they've done an incredible job of actually kind of beating that drum. So what about some of the things that you expected to happen that didn't happen?
Yeah, so I mean, the first one was I thought that it was going to be like a banner year for HR tech. I mean, like HR tech is a massive tech category outside of hotels, and the acute needs of hotels are much more salient than any other industry.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at until Google, HR was kind of viewed as this administrative function. It's like, oh, fill out the benefits paperwork and like get the compliance training done. And it's like Google's like, no. Like people are they're the largest asset we have in our business, and they're the core catalyst for growth. We need to invest in them and in bringing them in. And this needs to be a science. It's not an administrative task.
Yeah.
It's a strategic task. And I thought that with the talent shortage, with the labor shortage in hotels, that hotels would start getting more creative. I thought they would start investing in branding. Like, obviously Muse does a ton around employee branding and what is life like at Muse, and why should you work at Muse versus the next PMS or hotel tech company or just tech company. And I think hotels still haven't figured this out. I don't know if it's necessarily their fault, or maybe like the market for HR tech is so big outside of hotels that they just haven't reached the hotel market yet. But like the Bamboo HR, Bamboo HR and Jazz HR and some of these branding tools that you guys are using, like why can't Hotel Marina Del Rey here in Los Angeles have their own branding page and have videos of employees talking about their life there and things like that to attract more talent? And I predicted that would happen this year because of the labor shortage, but it didn't. I didn't see too much movement. There was a company I called out called Hierology that's done a really nice job with like a vertically focused applicant tracking system. They're also focused on a couple other verticals. So I think hotels are getting bigger for them, but not quite there yet, but they're doing a really nice job. And we definitely saw some of these gig work, like full-time gig laborers in the hotel industry take off. But beyond that, it wasn't the tectonic shift that I thought was going to happen. I thought it was kind of going to be a wave like guest experience, and just didn't happen as much as I thought.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. I think that, like, I'd probably say that there is a structural problem with the way that hoteliers actually kind of look at employees. I think that, like, I've been, it's weird because on the one side, like, we're a tech company and we really want to automate as many different things as possible. And I think that that's one of the things that people always kind of say to us is like, oh, but you're just basically trying to kind of get rid of people. And we're like, no, we want people to be there. We want them to do like real hospitality. We just don't want them to kind of be form fillers or basically like, people who just kind of do admin stuff and essentially the equivalent of an ATM machine. We just think that there's so much more that they could be doing. And one of our biggest preoccupations is basically like, how do we make hotel staff the best paid people on the planet? And I think like,
Yeah.
especially with AI and things like that, you kind of go like, how can we create, receptionists or basically like, experienced curators, into like an actual like creator category basically that you actually have.
Yeah.
But then, through the ways of monetization of, experience making is actually something
Yeah.
that you can create. And that's the thing that like long term I think has to happen to this industry. But I think that things basically have to kind of change. I think on that point, one of my favorite companies that I've seen do a really really good job with actually some of their branding and things like that is almost in the way that you can kind of see that some of these things are actually kind of being broken up, and you almost see like a rise in competition from like almost like platforms basically becoming like management companies in some ways. And
Yeah.
there's one company called Harry that I think is primarily kind of on I think the east coast of the US, and they do a really really good job in hospitality in the UK as well. And they're fantastic in terms of actually kind of finding hospitality talent that can actually kind of come in, and they do some really really amazing work with training and actually getting people into hospitality as well. So I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that's going to be a kind of longer term trend, but I do see that some of these platforms basically are doing a really really good job in that. And yeah,
Yeah.
we always encourage it. Like we always I think that there's a team that we have here called our Muse University team, and it's led by a guy called Liam, who's one of my favorite essentially product managers that we have at Muse. And he's head of creating the Muse University basically, and it's
Yeah.
one product that we're now trying to actually give to hotels so that they can basically actually kind of have these types of training programs and branding programs basically, because we've seen that like in our war for talent in tech, it's something that we've had to do. And we
Yeah.
see the same thing where like hotels have to get better at this. Like management companies have to get better at this basically, like brands have to get better, because we have to get
Totally.
people excited about working for hospitality companies. Anyway,
100%.
sorry, that was yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the technology that's out there, it's like it's totally doable. Like working on property at a hotel like 10, 15 years ago, it's pretty rough. Like just a lot of people
Yeah,
yelling at you. And if you're a
yeah,
revenue manager, a marketer, you're like in some like basement with no windows. And now it's like you could be a revenue manager kind of on the go, and you could be a guest experience professional that doesn't have to be tied to the front desk. So I think more than ever, it could be a fun and really rewarding job. And it is more and more throughout the industry, and obviously more some of those more innovative players. Like even I know Rami from Lifehouse, another
yeah,
payer company, is always focused on like making it as easy as possible so that they can bring in a more diverse pool of talent versus like, oh, someone who knows like this PMS and this account management
yeah,
software and this audit tool. It's like, no, we're going to find someone who's just like an awesome person who's super
yes,
charismatic and people want to be around, and they're going to
yeah.
figure out the rest of this and make it really easy.
Yeah, like how to actually bring that hospitality. I think like this is one thing that I just don't understand why I don't see more of. Like, like sorry, I know that I should be going on to the next thing, and probably the marketing department's going crazy. But like, right, like I'm so passionate about this, and I just, I long for the day when people are, those cringy posts that you saw basically about becoming a product manager at like Facebook and all of these things that you saw. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, the downside of that is like basically like it's super glamorous for people watching that. Yeah. So like, yeah, like everyone else like, thinks it's really, really funny that like, you go in and you have this like great lifestyle and stuff like that. But like for people that like that is aspirational. Yeah. Like when are we going to see the same type of posts basically from people who are hospitality professionals who are like, look, I'm having this really, really awesome time. This is what I did basically, and this is how I'm kind of like living my life. And I think
Yeah.
that we have this expectation on ourselves that it has to be drudgery. Yeah, it has to be tough work. It has to be
Yeah.
12-hour shifts, basically. Yeah, that just like,
Yeah.
where somebody is just like horrible to you. Like, I don't know, like we all kind of started out like that. Like, and I loved being a receptionist. Fine, it wasn't very well paid. And I think still the average rate that you guys have this like, incredible fact sheet of stats basically from the hospitality industry. And there's one which is super like unfortunate, which is that the average rate for a hospitality professional basically, or for somebody at reception, is like $12 an hour. Yeah, and I just
Yeah.
think like, that's so low in terms of, especially once we have all of these technologies, everything's kind of AI enabled, the ability
Yeah.
to kind of place make, experience make, to really kind of create hospitality experiences from that perspective, that's got to be worth more than $12 an hour.
Yeah, and look, I think it's controversial, especially with like unions, but ultimately the money has to come from somewhere to make these more attractive jobs financially. So the first thing
Yeah,
I'll say is that the one thing in the HR side that I think did start to take off this year, not in a massive way, but pretty meaningful, is digital tipping. And
mm,
so that's right, like
massively.
that's a way to get more money in the pockets of staff, and it's not just everyone gets a raise. It's like the people doing the best jobs are getting directly compensated by guests. When some guests obviously are turned off by like seeing a barcode and like asking for more money when like rates are higher than they've ever been. But I think
Yeah,
it's really an important step. But yeah, I think the other thing that's more controversial is like right now that we have technology, it realistically does take, you still have all these like really important people facing roles, but it takes less people to run a hotel. And so
yeah,
we're always focused on the volume of jobs instead of optimizing for the quality of jobs. And it's like, imagine if
100%.
you could go from 4 people at your hotel at the front desk making minimum wage, overworked like crazy, to leveraging technology, having 2 people making double what those people were making before. Now this is an
Yeah.
attractive job and you get more demand for this type of role. I think we need to start shifting from volume into quality of the roles that we're giving people.
Yeah. I think that kind of speaks to, sometimes I think hoteliers basically, they kind of want to run the same hotel that they built. Yeah. So they built it basically like, at some point, and that's the experience that they always kind of do. And I think that, the, the thesis around technology is that there's an ever improving scale of all of these things basically. Like you figure something out, you basically go to a different model, and you constantly kind of on the move. And like I feel like, within Muse, that's one of the main things that we actually do with our hotels is we start this partnership basically of how to think differently about hospitality, whether it's, making the most out of actually the spaces that you sell. Yeah. And
Yeah.
or for example, like understanding like where exactly on that guest journey can you monetize more? Because you've already sold the room. Yeah. And now
Yeah.
there's, whole, essentially like 16 hours of extra revenue that you could be actually kind of selling, and like you focus
Yeah.
on just the eight, yeah,
Yeah.
that constitutes that room. So yeah, anyway, but so I guess that was that technically was number two. So what about the big surprise?
Yeah, I mean, it's less of a surprise and more of like what I expect to be happening this year is like the big surprise last year. I mean, for anyone who's not super, dorky technical, like following white papers, it's obviously Gen AI, like what started in November of 2022 that we we're all like, where the hell did this come from? Even though it's been in development for like 7, 8 years. But it really just started with like chatbots in this industry. And I think when you look at vertical market software, which is the space we're obviously in, it's kind of plagued by a lot of like really clunky UI, lots of dashboards that people aren't using as much. And I think conversational and generative AI is going to make all these things more accessible, where you can kind of have your personal assistant, and it's not just the guest chatting with the hotel to book a room on the
Yeah,
website. It's like the housekeeper asking which room they should go clean next based on data
yeah.
from the PMS. And so I think there's going to be a lot more of that, which is basically like, and it's kind of weird because I think that
You've been
generative AI
spying
also,
our roadmap, haven't you?
I think it makes it harder for new companies to enter, because there's all these new companies that are like, we're doing Gen I for hospitality. It's like, well, you have no data. You're just starting your
Yeah,
company now. Muse has been in business for 10 years and has thousands of hotels that are using the software and all these data points. That's when generative AI becomes really interesting. And so I think more categories of software that are not just chatbots between guest and staff or guest and reservations department are going to proliferate. And the other huge one for everyone, my business, your business,
mm,
hotel business, is the rollout of AI and search. I mean, we've
yeah,
just all taken for granted that like search is how we find stuff. And obviously, Google's had this technology for a long time, and they have a vested interest in not rolling it out because they need to figure out how to like offset the ad losses or reconfigure their ads in a generative AI world. And so I think hotels really need to watch that space carefully because there could be a moment when Google just changes and all of
Yeah.
their customer acquisition strategies and all of Booking.com and Expedia's customer acquisition strategies are no longer valid. And there's something new and someone's going to come and win that. I have no idea what that's going to be. If I did, I'd feel a lot better about the future, but it's going to impact all of us for sure. Like how Google plays this out and how Google and Microsoft kind of go at it in terms of bringing generative AI into search.
Yeah, like I know that we're slightly over, but that's like what you get with me, and I guess basically like because I'm so fascinated with you, so we are going to go maybe 5 minutes over. So I hope that that's okay for everyone, and you know their bosses are not going to fire them for this. But I like just to kind of go on that point. I do think if I had to make a bold prediction, I do think that like AI has to basically be some kind of death for the middleman. I'm not saying that like Booking.com and Expedia should kind of, if you hold them as stock, basically you should be selling down or anything like that. But like,
Yeah,
it just, if you have, the ability to be that kind of smart assistant, that travel agent, basically,
yeah,
I think, and then thinking about, well, how do you become better than a Bard, than a Chat GPT? Yeah, and I think that
yeah,
if it's only about supply and understanding how you basically match that primal customer with basically the supply,
yeah,
then what exactly, it's basically just optimization. It's kind of dark patterns.
totally.
It's saying like book now because there's 5 people kind of booking at it. Well, the AI kind of knows, it knows
Yeah,
like when to book. Basically, it can probably manage your financial situation better. Yeah, so basically it
yeah,
knows when to actually, and I think that it's like we really really think about what does that world actually kind of look like, what kind of different ways of selling do you need to have, so for example, like, are you going to be able to kind of offer a price that essentially is kind of like built in with down payments basically, or that you're thinking about it as a credit product. And
yeah,
I think that that's one of the reasons why we think so deeply about financial services, is because
yeah,
to a certain extent both of these parties basically that will be assisted by the AI in the middle, yeah, are going to
yeah,
be kind of matching credit scores almost basically to kind of say like, on the one side, like, do I want this customer for this kind of, credit situation? And on the other
yeah,
side, basically it's saying like, does this hotel, does this piece of supply basically, like, does this part of the experience that I want to kind of go fit into my kind of experience budget that I have for the year, and
yeah,
how can those two actually kind of get together? And I don't want to get too future about it, but like I just feel like that kind of relationship is the ping pong that you'll see through AI, and maybe it'll
yeah,
come in like 5 years. Maybe it's not going to be something that happens kind of overnight, but it is basically just the ability to have that kind of AI, move from still this very reactive, like we still prompt the machine, to basically a
yeah,
proactive one where you're kind of leaving it on autopilot to basically kind of make sure that it's making some of those decisions for you, and putting some of
yeah.
those options and bets basically for you, on those types of experiences, on the way that you'd like to experience the world. That I think is super interesting.
Totally. And I
Um,
think eventually it'll move to like personal AIs and it'll know your data and your calendar and your financial situation and your desires and all of that. And I think the first step is kind of like the software layers building the AI to be like assistants for the software. So,
mm,
obviously Booking and Expedia have done these like chatbots that are still kind of like whatever. But figuring out what are the ways that software companies, whether that's Muse, whether that's Hotel Tech Pro, whether that's Booking and Expedia, can build the AI and start building out those use cases that make the most sense for the business that then personal AIs can then tap into in the future.
yeah. I think that's basically how we think about the future of the PMS. It's actually, making hotels AI enabled, so that basically like, so that the data can actually kind of chat with the chatbot, and actually like it'll go to you because that's where it actually kind of gets all of the information, so actually
Yeah,
like having the cleanest and clearest kind of data receptacle basically for those questions, so that it doesn't have to kind of be, muddied by, strange data or strange kind of things that is kind of hospitality specific or something like that. I think that,
Yeah.
that's what we kind of look for in terms of, the cleanness of that data, so that basically like it can really, really, transact with an AI machine in the background. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, surprise wise, it's that we were surprised. I mean, obviously it's technically 2022 when this like kind of shocked the world. And then started to roll out with, chatbots and content marketing, the lowest common denominator use cases, if you will, that were just the easiest to implement and understand. And now this year, I think the big shock will be seeing it in much more categories of software and tools that we interact with.
Definitely. So then moving on to 24, because apparently we do have to wrap this up, even though I could probably, go on with you for ages. What do you expect to see in 24? I know you sent a huge list of really, really exciting things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think excuse me, from a hotel technology perspective, as I said earlier, AI builds a moat around legacy businesses, and then Views would fit into that bucket. The businesses that have access to the data are now able to make that data more actionable. So I'm predicting that we're going to see less companies starting in this space. And obviously, it's a high cost of capital environment. We're going to see less new technology companies coming, but the companies that are here and have the data, I think we're going to start to see them pull ahead of the pack. I think we're going to continue to see more consolidation amongst tech companies. You kind of have these companies that struggled through COVID and then like made it out and were like, they still were like married to the valuations of 2021, and they think that their company's worth 10 times revenue, even though it's not at scale and it's probably worth
Yeah, yeah.
four. And those companies
That's why
are
I'm happy that
finding
I never raised in 2021, basically. Like only kind of like 22. It was rough, but
and I think so. I think like, but more even on the smaller company side. I mean, we both know there's so many companies that are like,
yeah.
5 million ARR and sub in this space. There will continue to be more consolidation. They'll find homes that'll be able to like leverage their tools better. Obviously, you guys have done a bunch of tuck-in acquisitions on the PMS side, on the POS side. I think we'll start to see more and more of kind of like a rationalization of this market. And I think that's good for, I mean, obviously not for certain founders in tight situations, but I think in terms of the aggregate market, it just makes the companies that are here stronger and better able to deliver value for their customers. And so I think net, that's going to be a really good thing for hotels, especially as they're, really focused on, like I said earlier, they're not as focused on new acquisitions and development because of the cost of capital. So they're looking at how do we optimize, how do we cut costs, how do we increase revenue with the assets we have? And like, good luck finding something that is able to better execute on that than software tools.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like, I think it was Stuart who's kind of talking about it. Like, if you think now, for example, like with all the different co-pilots, you just make, every single developer so much smarter and so much better. So from that perspective, if you're thinking about it, if you're really kind of working in this way, I think that, if you have the developer team that basically in your company is based around like really, really hardcore technology, as I think we are, and other players basically like in space kind of are, you probably will actually kind of start to actually see that kind of acceleration, because it just is easier to kind of gain that velocity basically. And once you have it, and once you have that kind of culture to just develop, I think it's a huge competitive advantage. And I think that's going to be like the really, really interesting part as well for, going forward basically in this space is, how much, because I do think, just as Joanne was talking about it right at the beginning, there just isn't enough creative destruction, and I think we tend to kind of think about it in a bad sense, but I think that, hotels, seeing more M&A within hotels, basically seeing more change within this industry, I think will be a really, really good thing. And I do prophecy the fact that like it will just accelerate in the same way that like technology is just accelerating basically. I think some of these underlying assets basically should really, really see a huge amount of change.
Absolutely.
Nice. Well, I think that's probably, even though I could probably, we could start off an entire 2 hours, and I really, really want to,
so to speak.
A clubhouse, like whatever happened, that was the greatest thing, during COVID.